Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I just want to repeat myself for a second and just thank each and every one of you for the continued support on this channel. Guys, I greatly appreciate it. And as I mentioned before, I just love talking about the weather and I love doing this. I love putting out content for you guys, so I'm glad y'all are enjoying it. I don't know why I said y'all. I know everybody's doing that in the weather community, and I'm not even from the South. I'm from the Midwest, so I gotta stop doing that. But anyway, thank you all so much for your continued support. It really means a lot. I greatly appreciate it. And if you have any questions, or if you want me to go over anything in particular that we don't talk about in today's video, say if you have a question about the weather for your area coming up here this weekend, go ahead and post those down in the comments below, and I will respond to every single one. So please feel free to do so. Well, listen, today we're going to be talking about, once again, another round of severe weather. This time it's going to be for a pretty small area for the most part. It's going to be mostly for the eastern Carolinas, for North and South Carolina, particularly for folks in Myrtle Beach and in Wilmington, and along the beaches of North Carolina. Then we also do have a secondary area of severe weather that's going to be pretty temporary, but you can obviously tell it's going to be for the Florida Panhandle, especially out towards Jacksonville. We're going to dissect this storm here in just a second because there's one thing I want to show you. By the time you're watching this video, the storm has likely already moved out of the region, but I just want to take a moment to sort of conceptualize what we've talked about the last couple days. I've really diatribed a lot about cold pooling, so I want to show you guys that in action. I think you're going to like it. It's pretty cool. We'll get to that here in a moment. But point is, there's really just two severe weather threats today, and they're very sub-regional, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it. I'll go over some of the hazards that we're going to expect. Mainly, spoiler alert, it's going to be mostly just damaging winds and maybe some small hail, up to an inch, quarter size. But we're not expecting a tornado threat today. I'm going to show you all that as well as to why we're not going to see a tornado threat like we've seen the last couple of days. It's pretty much non-zero at this point. We're going to get into all that during today's video. And also, we are going to be talking about something that came up on our radar, no pun intended, that is really important to cover, and that is a large geomagnetic storm that is heading towards Earth. Now, don't worry. We're not going to be harmed physically. It's not something that's lethal, but it can cause some pretty significant disruptions to our ways of communications, such as telecommunications and transformers, things like that. So, but also, besides all of the doom and gloom of it, it could produce some pretty damn cool northern lights across a lot of the United States. And we could be seeing northern lights, depending on how the weather cooperates, as far south as Alabama and even towards Northern California. These are areas that you typically don't see northern lights. I mean, commonly, if you want to see northern lights, you got to at least come all the way up here to the upper Midwest, or even cross the international border into Canada, into Saskatchewan, Ontario, and just pretty much Canada and points north in latitude. So there's a lot to talk about today. I don't think any of us had geomagnetic storm on our bingo card, but we're going to get into all this during today's video. So if you do enjoy today's video, be sure to like and subscribe, share with family and friends, because hey, we're not just talking doom and gloom today. We're also talking about some really cool northern lights that you might be able to see. And I'm going to make sure that we also discuss who will have the best opportunity to see northern lights beginning tonight into early tomorrow morning, early Saturday morning. So let's start first here with that latest on what has been just a swath of severe weather across the Gulf. This, by the way, has transcended since yesterday. So the last couple of days, as I mentioned before, we've been talking a lot about the idea of cold pooling, right? And we've talked about the idea that as you get all these mature cells to merge, you essentially also get the little cold pools to merge too. And when that happens, just think about adding things together. The more you add cold pooling together, the larger, the broader cold pool gets. And why cold pooling is important is because cold air sinks. It's going to hit the ground, and then once it hits the surface, that air is going to rush forward in the form of strong winds. So let's dissect that a little bit. We're not going to go too crazy on this diatribe, but I just want to, wrap a bow on the common theme that we've seen the last couple of days with our weather across the south and back towards the plains. So let's head on down to the great state of Florida and into the Panhandle. And so here we go, right? This is, by the way, courtesy of College of DuPage Meteorology. And as you can see on this loop, I mean, at this point, we are pretty much linear, or what we would call quasi-linear, because notice how we're not completely horizontal here. We sort of hook out towards Tallahassee, and then we go straight down. And let me go ahead and actually pause this here. I think you're going to see it a lot better if we go, oops, right there. There we go. So here's the situation. And again, just a disclaimer, as I always say, you want to make sure you check the latest from the National Weather Service as well as the Storm Prediction Center for the latest updates on the weather for your area. As this video is coming out in the morning, these forecasts are subject to change. But as of this morning, we can certainly see a QLCS. And how do we know? Because again, as I just mentioned, QLCSs mean that they're not completely linear, they're somewhat linear. That's what quasi-linear means. So if we were to draw this out, you can see that we are quasi-linear once we bow out towards Tallahassee. Okay, and so this is what we would call a EWBT, or an echo wave pattern. You can also call it a bow echo, right? And so, you know, all, what's it called, abbreviations aside, this is certainly a bow echo. How do we know that? Because it literally looks like a bow. That's the best way to do it. There really isn't anything complex about it in trying to identify it on reflectivity. Once you see this bowing structure, that is telling you that we have a bow echo. It's a bow echo signature on radar. So what does that mean? Well, when we have bowing on these lines of storms, what this is actually indicating to us is behind that line of thunderstorms, there is an area of colder air, right? And again, we've talked about it. I think if you played a drinking game, for those that legally can drink, I think I've said cold pooling already in this video about 8 or 9 times. And I also said it over the week, maybe 30 or 40. So the idea of cold pooling is just an area of cold air. And so they typically sit behind this bowing structure of storms. And what's happening, just to reiterate, is that when you have a bunch of cold air, well, that cold air is sinking. When it hits the ground, it's going to want to rush forward, right? It's not going to go back up in the air. It's going to want to hit the ground. It's going to want to rush forward in the form of what we call an outflow boundary. These outflow boundaries tend to produce straight line winds. They can also produce tornadoes as well. We've actually observed tornadoes this morning out of this same line, because sometimes what can happen is as that cold air is rushing forward, sometimes you can get little spin-ups as cold air is moving forward. If you're having, say, warm air advecting to the north, and then you have cold air moving to the south and southeast, it sort of acts like a frontal boundary. And so when you get these converging of winds, you can sometimes get little brief spin-ups to take place and thus observe tornadoes. So just because you have a line of thunderstorms doesn't mean that they can't produce tornadoes. Under the right conditions, sometimes you can even have embedded supercells within this line. You could have embedded supercells sort of here and to the north. You could also have them to the south of the bowing structure. And then you could literally just have a bow echo and then embedded supercells sort of surrounding it. So depending on the environment, a lot of things can happen with this. So don't just think that these cold pool events or these damaging straight line wind events are just damaging straight line winds. I've seen many times you get tornadoes out of them too. So, of course, given the right circumstances. But that's what we're dealing with right now. That's going to continue to move across northern Florida. We're really just expecting a damaging wind threat out of that. We have still seen tornadoes. Clearly, I'm seeing quite a bit of moisture and thermal advection out ahead of this thing. So it's certainly got plenty of room to run as it moves from the western side of the Panhandle, all the way to the eastern side of Florida over here in the next couple hours. And again, by the time you're watching this video, it will likely have already moved through the region. So that's pretty much it for that severe weather threat in Florida. Oh, by the way, one last thing to note, you might not be able to really see this very well. Do you guys, I don't know, let's try to see if I can zoom in. There's this little beaming here. You see that? So that's actually an issue with the radar. It's sort of a beaming issue. So in case you're seeing that, sometimes that happens on these WSR 88Ds. They have these little beams that show up, or sometimes you can even see wind farms or birds flocking or flying through. I may do a video on radar identification. That actually brings up a good idea. But point is, this will happen sometimes. So that is not convection, it's not precipitation, it is clearly a beaming issue with the radar. All right, but I'll be sure to discuss more about that in another video because I think that'd actually be pretty cool to look at all the different radars and look at their kind of unique features because many of them have things like geese and wind farms that interfere with the radar. So anyway, we'll have to put that on pause here for another time. Now for today, here's the latest SPC outlook. We sort of highlighted it already. And again, as I mentioned, I'm not going to really dissect this as much as I did the other events. Not because I think this event's just going to bust or because it's not going to happen. It's just because it's a relatively straightforward event. And you're going to see why here in just a few minutes. But look at the latest outlook. We do have currently an enhanced risk for severe weather. And that's pretty much highlighting the area that we just saw with that sort of QLCS moving through. That's going to be pretty much bringing some damaging straight line winds for the areas highlighted here in the enhanced, and that's going to be for places like Jacksonville and much of extreme northern Florida, and then also getting into Savannah, Georgia as well. So that's area number one, and like I said at the very beginning of this video, that is a temporary risk of severe weather, so only expecting that here for the next couple of hours from 9 a.m. this morning all the way up to about 1 p.m. By the time we get to 1 p.m., things should clear out by that point. We'll get all that that cold pooling to cool down the temperature and stabilize the region for a bit. Could see some isolated storms later on in the evening, as per usual at a place like Florida, the good old 2 to 4 o'clock storms. But for the most part, things should quiet down after about 1 o'clock or so, and thus eliminating that severe risk. But then we also have a second one up towards the coastal Carolinas, and that's going to be for places like Wilmington and Myrtle Beach. This one's, again, it's a very conditional threat. It's somewhat of a different system, and the likelihood here is going to be more so damaging winds and maybe some large hail. I think I mentioned before quarter size at most is what I'm expecting, so I'm not expecting anything higher than that in my opinion, but hey, I could be wrong. Meteorologists can be. So we will find out tomorrow. But that is going to be just for today. And then by the time, by the way, we get to tomorrow, depending on how much I talk about tomorrow's severe risk, we're only looking at a marginal, and I might cover this briefly tomorrow too, but this is going to be for El Paso. We're going to have some convection that fires off sort of the Mexican plateau / higher elevations of Mexico. So this is going to be pretty mesoscale induced. We may talk about it because I think there certainly present the risk of some Texas magic with severe weather. So people that live in Texas, you guys know severe weather is pretty wild down there. So I may still cover that just for the hell of it. But that is going to be for Saturday. And as you see, I mean, it's a very small area of extreme western Texas out towards the international border between Mexico and the United States. So let's quickly talk about today's threat. We already highlighted the Florida, so we're going to skip the enhanced. That's pretty straightforward. But I do want to focus real quickly on the threat for the Carolinas. So we'll start first here with the jet stream. And this has been that damn pesky jet stream, that occluded low we've been talking about the last couple of days, responsible for the severe weather we've seen out in the plains, as well as Texas and back towards the Gulf this morning. That is still spinning out here with this big closed low in the Rockies that's going to continue to churn over the next couple of days. As it does so, it's going to bring this Pacific jet stream cutting across the southern United States. That's been responsible for a lot of our just continuous convection in the Gulf the last 24 hours. But then we also have a secondary system downstream. This is what we call a clipper. So clippers typically are going to be these cold fronts that move through. They originate from Canada and they slide all the way down. So that's exactly what's happening here. And so we have, rather than a negatively tilted trough out towards the Rockies, this time we have what we would refer to as a positively tilted trough. And with these positively tilted troughs, again, you can get severe weather, but it's going to be a little bit of a different environment. For example, as we look here at the 500, it's going to be moving essentially from the northwest to the southeast. We're not seeing this west to east propagation. But we still get some pretty strong winds aloft. And in case you're wondering, this is our jet stream we always refer to, 500 millibar height. You can see in our jet stream level out towards the Carolinas later on this afternoon, we see these winds strengthen a bit as that cold front moves over the Appalachians. You can see some orographic enhancement here, about 65 to 67 knots of mid to upper level flow. That's not bad. We certainly do have some forcing aloft. But if we look here at the 850, you notice that our winds, it might be somewhat hard to tell, so let's go ahead and zoom in here. But you notice that our low-level winds here on the 850, remember these are winds about 1 kilometer off the ground, are backed, right? So notice how our wind barbs, these are our surface winds, they are coming out of the west. Okay, so if we look here, you notice that we don't see any southerly flow here at all. This is all backed. So what that tells me as a forecaster right away, I don't even have to look at photograph. I already know that the veering is going to be next to nil. So relative storm mode here is we're not going to be expecting any sort of warm sector convection. This is pretty much going to be frontal. By the time this cold front swings over the Appalachians, that's when we're going to get initiation out towards Myrtle and Wilmington, North Carolina. And that takes us, by the way, into later on this afternoon, likely around the 2 to 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern time frame. So let's show you here what that all looks like. I mentioned the photograph, so I might as well show you what I'm talking about here. And I don't know why it's not showing it on there. I guess we can go back to national. Maybe it might show it on here. Oh, it doesn't. That's weird. I guess the photographs are messed up. Okay, that's okay. But, all right, that's fine. Let's go back to Carolina. We'll zoom in again. I was going to pull up the photographs and show you how messy it was, but I guess that's not going to happen. But what I can do is I'm going to pull a sounding and see if I can't show it here. Yeah, there we go. So, right away, look at this photograph. Kind of like what the Nickelback says. Look at this photograph. Get it? Look. Photograph right here. Look at this photograph. I always think Nickelback. That's such a corny joke. But as you can see, we're not like showing this veering. It's pretty messy. However, we have really strong winds aloft as indicated by this yellow and light blue vector. That's corresponding to our mid and upper level winds. So as you can see, look at all of our wind barbs. We're out of the west, out of the west, out of the west, out of the southwest, out of the southwest for a bit. And then, but for the most part, mostly backed. So what that tells me is that we are likely going to see mostly damaging winds as well as hail. The only way we're getting tours is if we have, our veering a lot more well-defined, our turning with height. We clearly do not have that here in the low levels. However, what we do have, look at our surface to 3 lapse rates. I mean, our temperature is very steep. It cools rapidly with height. We're at 84 at the surface, but then we're actually decreasing our temperature by the time we get up to about 1 kilometer off the ground. So there are certainly some good lapse rates to work with here if we're talking about hail formation. But if we're looking at the tornado threat, it's really not that impressive. I didn't show it on the map here on Pivotal, I'm just realizing, but we do have a 2% tour for the Carolinas, and then we just have a 15% wind and a 15% hail threat for today. So I did forget to show that. I do apologize. Let's go to reflectivity real quickly here and show you exactly what I'm talking about. This is going to take us into the afternoon, right around 18Z, so just about 2 Eastern. You can notice some cells just beginning to fire right near Myrtle Beach. So for folks going out to the beach today, you want to be mindful. It's going to be kind of a crappy day today. You're going to have some window of opportunity beginning this morning and then going into the mid-noon or afternoon hours, but once you get to the early afternoon and mid to late afternoon, that's when things start to get a little bit dicey here. Because again, this is going to take us there into about 1, 2 o'clock Eastern. We get some initial cells to fire off towards Myrtle Beach and Wilmington, just off the coast there. But then as that cold front, as we talked about, moves from the northwest to the southeast, you're going to begin to see some broader convection fire off here in the form of just kind of this messy line. Now, you get some individual cells to fire up towards the northern part of North Carolina, but for the most part, by the time we get towards our coastal Carolinas, you can see that we are pretty much linear, and then it moves through the beaches and moves off the coast. There could be some additional cells that fire off behind this thing, but they likely will not hold up as well, and they may not even be severe limits by the time we get to later on tonight for portions of northern North Carolina. So as you can tell, I mean, we are going to see, a conditional severe threat, but this certainly isn't like what we've seen the last few days across the plains and the Gulf. This is a cold front that's a clipper system, a weak surface low that's going to move through. You're going to get some orographic enhancement with that cold front as it progresses over the Appalachians, which is going to allow for initiation later on today. You do have instability as well. Cape values today are around 3,000 for this area. So certainly energy to tap into. However, our kinematic environment is not that great, and our forcing and lifting is not at all that impressive from what we've seen the last couple of days. It's certainly there, but it's weaker forcing here for some of this convection. So conditional severe threat, we'll maybe highlight it tomorrow if we did see any crazy severe weather reports, but I'm only expecting damaging winds and hail as being the primary threat for today. Tornado threat's going to be a non-zero. So that covers the severe weather discussion. Now let's go to the biggest elephant in the room, and that is this guy. Now, I'm going to preface by saying I really don't know much about space weather. My degree field is in meteorology, and I always joke with people that I tend to stick to the troposphere, and that's about it. I don't even like venturing out into the stratosphere, but we do have this to talk about, and I didn't realize how significant this event is, but we do have a geomagnetic storm watch. This is going to go in effect for tonight into tomorrow morning. This has a lot to do with the coronal mass ejection that has taken place here over the last 24 hours from the sun. And we do have actually a couple of CMEs, a couple of these coronal mass ejections that are essentially merging together. We talked about cold pooling merging, now we're talking about coronal mass ejection mergers, and that's going to create a much larger CME, and that's anticipated to arrive here on Earth. That sounds so badass to say that it's going to arrive at Earth as opposed to a location. I don't know, I'm weird. To arrive at Earth by late on May 10th or early on May 11th. So it's going to be later on tonight, early tomorrow morning, and into Saturday. So the general effects here, and I'll sort of go back here a moment, but I mentioned this at the very beginning of the video, guys. I don't want to make this seem like it's the sky is falling. It's going to actually be, I think, more of a visual and a really cool opportunity to stargaze versus, panicking about ending the world, right? It's certainly not going to do that. But here's some more information about it. Right, so we've had several strong flares observed the past few days associated with a large magnetically complex sunspot cluster 16 times the diameter of Earth. My God, that's pretty crazy. And again, a lot of this stuff is really amazing to me. It goes over my head. It really does. But I'm trying to understand it. I really am. The only thing I know about space weather is I know electromagnetic physics, but I know it at a undergraduate level. So I'm certainly not somebody that has taken like quantum physics or anything relating to astronomy, except an elective. So that's pretty much all I know. But here's the other fact. Only 3 severe geomagnetic storms have been observed during the solar cycle. The last G4 was on March 23rd, 2024. But then the last G5 was the Halloween storms of October 2003. These kind of events are very rare. I mean, think about how we talk all the time about severe weather. Imagine with moderate and high risks only getting those once every 10 to 15 years for severe weather. That's pretty much what this is, right? So large sunspot groups and flares lead to first G4 watch since 2005. It's pretty crazy. It's been close to 20 years. So think about it, guys. I mean, 2024 has already been off to a pretty wild start. We had our solar eclipse, which was a pretty potent solar eclipse out of the ones we've seen in terms of totality. We also have seen a high risk of severe weather and a couple of moderates. We've seen some pretty insane tornadoes produced in the plains as well as the Midwest. And now we are expecting to see probably one of the worst geomagnetic storms we've seen since 2005, since in 19 years. So this is going to likely, if anything, cause some disruptions to telecommunications. So if you notice your Wi-Fi or data going down, it's probably why. Depending on how bad it is, I don't think it's going to be terribly long that things will be down, but we have seen storms like this bring down, transformers temporarily and telecommunications. So I don't want to focus too much on that because, that's kind of doom and gloom as I talked about. But what I do want to focus on is the best areas that I feel are going to be great for stargazing tonight. Now, I would look at cloud cover. I want to be really careful with that just because I also want to look at the overall pattern that we're in the next couple of days. So we've mentioned this at the very top of the conversation. We have this broad jet flow across the Gulf. And actually, let me change that to black. I do expect quite a bit of cloud cover within this region just because you have that closed low that we keep referring to, just spitting out Pacific flow. And when that happens, you tend to get quite a bit of cloud cover, sometimes in the form of a stratus deck that can block things out. So I'm not really too bullish on this area for seeing the northern lights later on tonight. And we'll kind of play this out here right now, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. See how that flow just continues for the region, for the south? That's just going to aid in your cloud cover. So by the time we get to Tuesday and as we go forward into early tomorrow morning, I think cloud cover is certainly going to be the issue. The same can be said about the Midwest. We were really focused on that first Clipper system moving through the Carolinas for our conditional severe threat today. Well, we also have a secondary Clipper system moving through the upper and lower Midwest later on tonight into tomorrow morning. And these Clipper systems are likely going to produce some rainfall across the lower Great Lakes. Not anything in the way of severe weather, but it is going to be enough to likely cloud over your stargazing efforts tonight to see the northern lights. And so the Pacific Northwest likely going to be the best spot to see it because you're to the north of that closed occluded low, and as you see, conditions look rather dry and quiet, and you should have a pretty clear sky to look at. I didn't show it on the video either, but I'm just going to circle it just for the sake of time. We are expecting to see the highest probability of northern lights for tomorrow morning. Early tomorrow morning. We're talking like 2, 3 a.m. local time for the northern latitudes. Now, they did mention on the National Space Weather Prediction Center that we could see some northern lights as far south as Alabama and Mississippi, although, as we've just mentioned, the cloud cover is going to be an issue. And so I'm going to say that the best opportunity to see northern lights within this broader circle is going to likely be the Pacific Northwest and then also the Northeast as well, especially areas that are away from light pollution. So folks in far reaches of New England, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, even upstate New York could be a really great opportunity to see some northern lights as well. So just to recap, really great opportunity for northern lights tonight. It's going to be pretty vibrant. You might even be able to see it with the naked eye. Late tonight and tomorrow morning. Best chance to see those is going to be the Pacific Northwest for folks in Washington, as well as Oregon, and even back towards Idaho and Montana, and for far reaches of New England, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and even upstate New York. And then, as we focused on in today's video, just a temporary severe weather threat for Florida. And then we do have another severe weather threat later on today for the Carolinas. All of that should clear out by later on this afternoon into the early evening. Listen, guys, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and share this with family and friends. I greatly appreciate all the support we've gotten this far on the channel. As I begin to lose my voice, we'll be back here tomorrow with another weather video. Take care, guys.